You picked it up from the shelf. It said beef. 100% beef. You trusted it. You brought it home. You fed it to your family. But what if I told you it wasn't beef at all? What if I told you that for nearly 2 years, Tesco was selling you horse meat and calling it beef? And here's the part that will really disturb you. They had no idea. Cast your mind back to January 2013. Tesco was the biggest supermarket in Britain, trusted by millions of families. A household name that had been on British high streets for decades. The kind of place your parents shopped. The kind of place you shopped. The kind of place you never once questioned. Their slogan at the time was, "Every little helps." It turned out, every little lie helps too. And on a quiet Tuesday morning, the 15th of January, a phone call changed everything. And the Food Safety Authority of Ireland had been doing routine tests on beef products sold across Irish and British supermarkets. Nothing dramatic, just standard checks they carried out every few months. But what came back from the lab stopped them cold. The results were so shocking that the team spent 2 full months retesting before they dared go public. They ran the tests again and again. They contacted external laboratories. They checked their equipment. They thought they had made a mistake. They hadn't. One single beef burger, sold under Tesco's own label, had tested positive for 29% horse DNA. Not a trace. Not a contamination. Nearly a third of that burger was horse. Once those findings were published, there was no putting the lid back on. The Food Standards Agency in the UK told every supermarket and food manufacturer to go and test their own products immediately. What came back was staggering. Horse DNA was found in 37% of beef products tested across multiple UK supermarkets. Tesco, Lidl, Aldi, Iceland, all affected. But it got worse. When investigators looked at Tesco's frozen ready meals, the everyday value spaghetti bolognese that millions of families had been buying for years, they found horse DNA levels exceeding 60%. And then came the result that made the entire country stop. Findus beef lasagna, one of the most popular frozen meals in Britain, tested positive for up to 100% horse meat. Not beef with a bit of horse mixed in, pure horse meat, packaged, labelled and sold as beef. Tesco pulled 10 million burgers from its shelves overnight, and their market value collapsed by £300 million in a single day. And the nation asked one question. How long had this been going on? Now here is the part of this story that nobody talks about. Because it wasn't an accident. It wasn't a mix-up. It wasn't a tragic mistake somewhere in a factory. It was deliberate, organised, and it had been running right under your nose for years. Think about how your weekly shop actually works. You walk into Tesco. You pick up a packet of burgers. You trust that somewhere between the farm and your trolley, someone responsible made sure it was exactly what it said on the label. That trust was the gap these people exploited. Here is how it worked. Tesco used approved suppliers to produce their beef products. Those suppliers were supposed to buy beef from verified, audited farms. On paper, a clean, yet accountable system. But horse meat costs a fraction of what beef costs, and someone in that supply chain looked at that price difference and made a calculation. A cold, deliberate, criminal calculation. They realised that if you could swap horse meat for beef at the processing stage, stamp it with the right paperwork, label it correctly, send it down the chain, nobody would ever know. The supermarket wouldn't test it. The regulators wouldn't check it. The family eating it on a Tuesday night certainly wouldn't taste the difference. And they were right. For years. The trail investigators eventually followed, ran from Ireland to the Netherlands, from the Netherlands to Poland, from Poland to France. At every single step, fake documents were passed along with the meat. Official-looking paperwork, stamps, signatures, all of it fraudulent. And the people doing this weren't amateurs. This was organised food crime on an industrial scale. And when the prosecutions finally came, years later, most of the companies involved paid a fine or issued an apology and walked away. Let that sink in. They fed millions of British families horse meat for years, and most of them were never even charged. Now, when this story broke, the government, the supermarkets, the food regulators. They all said the same thing almost immediately. This is not a food safety issue. The horse meat is not dangerous. Please don't panic. And millions of people heard that and breathed a sigh of relief. But I want you to stay with me for a moment, because there is a detail that was mentioned briefly in the early coverage, and then quietly disappeared. And it has never sat right with me. Racehorses are routinely given a powerful pain-killing drug called phenylbutazone. You might know it as Bute. It's used to treat joint pain and inflammation in horses, the same way a doctor might prescribe ibuprofen to you. The difference is this: Bute is completely and totally banned from the human food chain. Not restricted, not limited, banned. Because studies have linked it to a rare but potentially fatal condition called aplastic anemia, where your bone marrow stops producing blood cells. There is no cure. The survival rate is poor. The European food safety system works on the assumption that any horse that has ever been given Bute in its lifetime is permanently excluded from the food supply. Forever. No exceptions. But here is the problem, the horses that ended up in your Tesco burgers and your Findus lasagna, they didn't come through the proper food chain. They came through a criminal network with fake paperwork. There were no proper checks on their medical history. Nobody verified whether those animals had been given Bute or not. When health authorities eventually tested the contaminated products, most came back clear. Most. And this fraud had been running for close to 3 years before anyone discovered it. How many products were never tested? How many had already been eaten? The FSA's own chief executive admitted publicly, "It is unlikely we will ever know how many people consumed this meat." They don't know. They said so themselves. And yet the official line was, "Don't worry, everything is fine. I'll let you decide what to make of that." For millions of British families, this wasn't just about food safety. It was about trust. That everyday value bolognese, that frozen lasagna, the burgers on a Friday night. These weren't luxury items. These were the foods that working families bought because they were affordable, because they trusted the label, because they trusted the supermarket. People had been eating these products for years, months. Some families had the same frozen lasagna on the table every single week. It was routine. It was familiar. It was safe. Or so they thought. And for people who had religious dietary restrictions, Muslims who do not eat horse, Jewish customers, people for whom this was not just a preference but a matter of faith, the betrayal ran even deeper. Nobody had asked their permission. Nobody had warned them. And nobody had even considered them when the fraudulent meat was being packaged up and sent to British supermarket shelves. The public reaction was unlike anything the food industry had seen before. 60% of British consumers changed their shopping habits. Organic food sales jumped 8% in the month after it broke. Butcher shops across the country reported their biggest sales increase in a decade, people going back to someone they could look in the eye and ask, "Where does this meat actually come from?" Tesco's annual profits that year fell by 52%. The brand took years to recover. And the most disturbing part? Tesco's own chief executive stood up and said, "We were also victims of this fraud. We didn't know." And that might even be true. But you were still the one who ate the horse. And here is what stayed with me when I researched this story. The horse meat scandal was only discovered because one food safety team in Ireland decided to do routine testing. Testing that wasn't even required by law. It was optional. Extra. Something they chose to do. If they hadn't made that choice, if they had just done the minimum required of them, we would never have known. Supermarkets and enforcement bodies had never tested for horse and beef products before, because nobody expected it to be there, because nobody thought it was worth checking. And what that tells you is this: we only find food fraud when we look for it. The question is, how much fraud exists in food we have never thought to look at? In 2023, investigators from Europol arrested 41 people across Spain, Belgium, Germany and Italy as part of a new horsemeat fraud operation. A decade after the original scandal. Still happening. Still now. Still going into the food supply somewhere in Europe. The number of food safety labs in England has dropped from 9 to 5 since 2013. The number of tests carried out by local authorities on food products has fallen by nearly 80%. Less testing, less oversight, Less accountability, more opportunity for the people who want to lie to you. So next time you pick up a packet in Tesco, next time it says 100% beef on the label, next time you trust that what you're feeding your family is exactly what it claims to be. Ask yourself one question: who actually checked? Subscribe for more investigations like this.